The front door opened, and conversations died mid-sentence. Thomas stood in the entrance of his sprawling estate, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression warm as he surveyed the gathered family. His eyes moved across the room. Cousins I barely knew, distant relatives, even the neighbor's daughter who'd crashed these events for years. Then his gaze landed on me. His smile vanished. He turned his back. I stood frozen in the doorway between the foyer and living room, a bottle of wine still clutched in my hands. The humiliation burned across my face like a physical slap. Around me, conversations resumed awkwardly, people pretending they hadn't just witnessed my father-in-law treat me like I didn't exist. "Thomas, you remember Lila?" my husband said weakly beside me. Thomas moved past us toward his sister, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Emily, you look wonderful. And is that Harold? Come in, come in." He greeted everyone. Warmly, enthusiastically. Distant cousins got hugs. The mailman got a handshake. Even the ex-girlfriend sitting smugly on the leather couch got a kiss on the cheek. But not me. My husband's hand squeezed mine, but he said nothing. No defense. No confrontation. Just an uncomfortable squeeze that somehow made the injustice worse. I'd been married to his son for 3 years. 3 years of family dinners, holiday gatherings, and forced pleasantries. And now, in front of 40 relatives, Thomas had made his feelings crystal clear. I was invisible, unwelcome, nothing. The question burned in my mind. Why did Thomas hate me this much? Dinner was torture. We sat at the massive dining table, 23 people crammed shoulder to shoulder, passing dishes and making small talk. I kept my head down, focused on my plate, trying to ignore the pitying glances from some relatives and the satisfied smirks from others. Then Thomas stood up. He clinked his wine glass, and the room fell silent. He smiled that practiced, politician smile he'd perfected over his 60 years. "I want to make a toast," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "To family, to loyalty, to people who marry for the right reasons, not for convenience or other motivations." Several relatives glanced at me. I felt my face burn. "We live in a world where values are forgotten," Thomas continued, his eyes deliberately avoiding me. "Where people make decisions based on what they can gain rather than what they can give. But in this family, we know better. We value character. We value integrity." My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me, but still said nothing. "So here's to those who truly belong." Thomas raised his glass. "And to recognizing the difference." The room erupted in uncomfortable applause. I sat perfectly still, my hands gripping the edge of the table. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate character assassination. And then I remembered something. The envelope I'd found 3 weeks ago while organizing Thomas's office. The envelope he thought was hidden. The one containing proof of a financial cover-up from 15 years ago. I'd never confronted him about it. Until tonight, I hadn't planned to. But things had just changed. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been organizing paperwork in Thomas's home office. My husband had asked me to help sort tax documents, something about needing to find old receipts for an audit. Thomas had been out of town, and the office was a mess of files and folders spanning decades. That's when I found it. A manila envelope tucked in the back of a locked drawer that hadn't been properly closed. Inside were bank statements, property transfer documents, and a series of emails that painted a very different picture of Thomas's business dealings than the one he presented to the world. 15 years ago, Thomas had been involved in a real estate transaction that went sideways. A property meant for development had been transferred under questionable circumstances. The buyer had been a shell company. The money had vanished. And according to these documents, Thomas had orchestrated the entire thing to hide losses from a failed investment. But the most damning part? The money involved wasn't just Thomas's. It had been diverted from a family trust, money meant for my husband and his siblings. I'd photographed every page with my phone. I'd researched the companies mentioned. I'd verified dates and signatures. And I'd quietly put everything back exactly where I found it. I told myself I'd never use the information, that it was wrong to snoop. that family secrets should stay buried. But tonight, sitting at this table while Thomas publicly humiliated me, I realized something. I hadn't come empty-handed. And let's not forget, Thomas continued, his voice dripping with false warmth, the importance of choosing the right partner. My son's former girlfriend, Amy, you remember her? She was a class act. Someone who understood our family values. Amy sat across the table, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. She'd dated my husband in college, and according to family lore, Thomas had loved her. When they broke up, he'd been devastated. When my husband brought me home 2 years later, the comparison had been immediate and unfavorable. Amy knew what it meant to be part of something bigger than herself, Thomas said, looking directly at her. Not everyone has that quality. The implication was clear. Amy was the standard. I was the disappointment. The room watched me, waiting for a reaction. Waiting for me to break or flee, or do something that would confirm Thomas's narrative about me. Instead, I smiled. Calmly. Deliberately. I set down my fork, dabbed my napkin at the corners of my mouth, and looked directly at Thomas for the first time all evening. Thomas, I said clearly, may I have a moment to speak? The room went completely silent. My husband's hand gripped my arm in warning, but I gently pulled away. Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting this. I suppose. Thank you. I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your emphasis on integrity and character. Those values are so important. Thomas's smile returned, triumphant. He thought I was conceding, which is why, I continued, I can only imagine how difficult it must be to maintain that image after certain past mistakes. Thomas's smile froze. I'm not sure what you mean, Thomas said, his voice tight. Of course not. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. The same color, the same size as the one I'd found in his office. I imagine some mistakes are easier to forget than others. I placed the envelope on the table in front of me. Thomas's face went pale. Around us, relatives leaned forward, confused but curious. My husband stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. What is that? Thomas demanded. Oh, just some documents I came across while helping with the tax preparation you asked for. You know, the ones from your office? The paperwork spanning the last 20 years. Thomas's jaw clenched. You had no right. Actually, I had every right. My husband asked me to help organize. You gave permission for me to access those files. I smiled gently. I'm very thorough with financial records. It's one of my strengths. This is ridiculous, Thomas sputtered. You're making a scene over nothing. Am I? I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Then perhaps you can explain the property transfer from November 2008. The one involving the Henderson Street development. Thomas's face went from pale to gray. The transfer to a company called Westbridge Holdings, I continued calmly. A company that, according to these documents, existed for exactly 6 months before dissolving. A company whose only listed address was a P.O. box in Delaware. Murmurs spread through the room. My husband looked between Thomas and me, confusion written across his face. You're talking about things you don't understand, Thomas said. Then help me understand, I replied. Help everyone understand. Thomas waved his hand dismissively. This is dramatic nonsense. Lila is desperate for attention, as usual. She probably found some old paperwork and invented a story. The property was purchased for $3 million, I interrupted. According to public records, it was sold 6 months later for $400,000. A loss of $2.6 million. That's not a story. That's a fact. The murmurs grew louder. Several relatives were pulling out their phones, presumably to search for the property records I'd mentioned. Real estate investments carry risks, Thomas said stiffly. Anyone in business knows that. Absolutely, I agreed. But here's what's interesting. The original purchase was made using funds from the Morrison Family Trust. The trust established by your father. The trust meant to provide for your children. My husband's head snapped toward his father. What? And when the property was sold at a loss, I continued. That money was never returned to the trust. Instead, it went to Westbridge Holdings, which then dissolved. With the money, with the money going somewhere else entirely. You're making accusations you can't prove, Thomas said, but his voice shook slightly. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, I said calmly. I'm simply describing what I found in your own files. Bank statements, transfer records, emails between you and the Westbridge Holdings representative, who, coincidentally, shares your initials. The room erupted in whispered conversations. My husband stared at his father, betrayal dawning across his features. This is absurd, Thomas said. She's been snooping through private documents and twisting everything. Actually, my husband said quietly, I asked her to organize those files. For our taxes. Thomas turned to his son. You gave her access to confidential family. You told me to have her help. My husband exploded. You said she'd be useful for once. The room went silent. My husband stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. But instead of defending me, he turned his anger in my direction. Why were you going through Dad's personal files? Tax documents don't go back 15 years. You were snooping. The betrayal hit me harder than Thomas's silent treatment. My own husband, the man who'd promised to stand beside me, was taking his father's side. I was organizing, I said evenly. You asked me to help. The files weren't labeled by year. I had to look through everything to find what we needed. And you just happened to find something convenient to use against my father? I found the truth. I corrected. There's a difference. This is exactly why I knew she wasn't right for this family, Thomas interjected, seizing the moment. She's vindictive. Manipulative. She's been looking for ammunition since day one. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. It's what I know, Thomas said. You've never fit in here. You've never understood what this family represents. And now you're trying to tear us apart with lies. They're not lies, I said. Every document I mentioned exists. Every date, every amount, every transaction, all of it can be verified. And you know it. Thomas's face flushed red. Get out of my house. No, I said. The single word hung in the air like a challenge. No one said no to Thomas. Not in his own home. Not in front of his family. What did you say? Thomas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I said no. I looked around the room at the shocked faces. I'll leave when I'm finished. But not before I clarify the truth. Because you've spent 3 years spreading rumors about me, making my life in this family unbearable. And tonight, I'm going to explain exactly why. You've blamed me for stories you started yourself, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Haven't you, Thomas? He said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. 3 years ago, when your son brought me home for the first time, you told several family members that I'd conveniently met him at a charity event. You implied I'd targeted him deliberately because of his family's wealth. That's not. You told your sister Emily that I'd asked about the family trust within a week of meeting you. That I'd been suspiciously interested in family finances. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You spread the rumor that I'd pressured your son into marriage. That I was after his inheritance. That I'd manipulated him away from Amy, who you believed was his perfect match. Amy's smug smile had disappeared. She was staring at her plate. None of it was true, I continued. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Every family event, I felt the judgment. The whispers. The cold shoulders. And when I asked my husband why everyone treated me like an outsider, he told me I was being paranoid. Lila, my husband said, his voice strained. But I wasn't paranoid, was I? I looked directly at Thomas. You wanted me gone from the beginning. You wanted your son to marry someone else. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who wouldn't accidentally stumble onto documents hidden in your office. Thomas's hands gripped the edge of the table. This is slander. You have no proof. Actually, a voice interrupted. She does. Everyone turned. Amy was standing, her face pale. I'm sorry, Amy said, looking at me. Thomas, I'm sorry, but I can't let this continue. Amy took a shaky breath. Thomas asked me to help spread those rumors. About Lila being after money. About her manipulating his son. The room exploded in gasps and whispered exclamations. Amy, what are you doing? Thomas demanded. I'm telling the truth, Amy said, her voice gaining strength. You called me 6 months after they got engaged. You said the family was concerned about Lila's intentions. You asked me to share concerns with other family members. To mention that she'd seemed very interested in the family's financial situation when we'd briefly met at a dinner. That's not what happened, Thomas said. Yes, it was, Amy said firmly. And I did it. I'm ashamed, but I did it. I was still hurt about the breakup. I thought maybe if I helped you, you'd see me as part of the family again. But you were just using me. And I let you use me to hurt an innocent person. She turned to me, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Lila. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve any of this. The room was completely silent. Thomas's control, his carefully constructed narrative, was crumbling in front of everyone. This is all very touching, Thomas said sarcastically, but it doesn't change the facts. Lila is making serious accusations about financial impropriety, and she has no credibility. She's a bitter daughter-in-law trying to. She has credibility with me, my husband said quietly. Thomas turned to his son, surprised. I've watched you treat her like garbage for 3 years, Dad. I told myself you were just protective, that you needed time to adjust. But Amy's right. You've been manipulating everyone, including me. I've been protecting you, Thomas insisted. From what? My husband demanded. From a woman who organizes my files? Who remembers everyone's birthdays? Who's been nothing but kind to this family despite being treated like an intruder? From the truth, I said softly. Everyone looked at me. That's the real answer, isn't it, Thomas? You weren't protecting your son from me. You were protecting yourself from what I might discover. Thomas's face went dark. You don't know what you're talking about. Then let's talk about the rest of it, I said. Because the Henderson Street property? That wasn't the only irregularity. You're lying, Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? I pulled out another document from the envelope. Let's talk about the family trust established by her father in 1989. The trust that was supposed to provide for his grandchildren's education and future. Several relatives leaned forward, suddenly very interested. According to the original trust documents, the assets were valued at approximately $8 million in 1995, shortly after your father's death. By 2010, it should have grown significantly through investments and compound interest. Markets fluctuate, Thomas said stiffly. They do, I agreed. Which is why I found it interesting that by 2015, the trust's value had dropped to less than $2 million. A loss of nearly 75% in a 15-year period that included significant market growth. You're making this up, Thomas said. Show us proof, one of the uncles demanded. If you're going to make these accusations, show us proof. Gladly, I said. I pulled out a stack of papers from the envelope. Copies. I'd made copies of everything before tonight. These are the trust's annual statements for the past 20 years. Notice the significant withdrawals in 2008, 2012, and 2015. 3 withdrawals, each for approximately $2 million. I passed the papers to the nearest relative, who began reading with wide eyes. Each withdrawal was classified as a property investment. The 2008 withdrawal was the Henderson Street development. The other 2 were similar ventures. All failed. All lost money. All used funds meant for your grandchildren. Thomas stood abruptly. This is a family matter. It's none of your business, and I won't be interrogated in my own home by someone who... Then perhaps we should discuss it with authorities, I said calmly, because misuse of trust funds is illegal. Thomas went completely still. You're threatening me? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm stating facts, I replied. You can either explain them to your family or explain them to a judge. Your choice. Let me see those documents, my husband's uncle demanded, standing up. I handed him the stack. He flipped through them, his face growing darker with each page. Others crowded around him, reading over his shoulder. These bank records, the uncle said slowly, they show transfers from the trust to personal accounts. Thomas, is this accurate? Those are private financial matters, Thomas said. Taken out of context and twisted by someone who doesn't understand complex estate management. I understand numbers pretty well, I said. And these numbers show that over 15 years, approximately $6 million was removed from a trust meant for your children and grandchildren. $6 million invested in properties that all failed. $6 million that never came back. Business ventures fail, Thomas said. That's not a crime. No, I agreed. But using trust funds for personal business ventures without trustee approval is. I am the trustee, Thomas snapped. You're one of 3 trustees, I corrected. According to the trust documents, major investments require approval from all 3. Did your brother and sister approve these transfers? Thomas's brother stood up. What transfers? Thomas, what is she talking about? The color drained from Thomas's face. You see, I continued, I found emails. Dozens of them. Between you and various real estate brokers, property managers, shell companies. And in those emails, you specifically mention keeping this quiet from the other trustees and minimizing transparency. You're lying, Thomas said, but everyone could hear the panic in his voice. I'm not. And if you'd like, I can read some of them aloud. Or better yet, I can forward them to your brother and sister. They're the other trustees, aren't they? The ones who thought the trust was safely invested in conservative bonds and mutual funds. Thomas's sister Emily stood up, her voice shaking. Thomas, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't gamble with our father's legacy. I was trying to grow the fund, Thomas said desperately. The investments made sense at the time. They were supposed to multiply the assets. But they didn't, I interrupted. They lost millions. And instead of admitting the losses and taking responsibility, you hid them. You restructured the trust documents. You created false reports. And you threatened anyone who might discover the truth. That's not like my uncle, I said quietly. The room went completely silent. Thomas stared at me. What did you say? My uncle, I repeated. The partner you blamed publicly when your business nearly bankrupted 15 years ago. The man whose reputation you destroyed to save your own. Thomas's face went ash white. That's why you recognized my maiden name when your son brought me home? I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. That's why you've hated me from the moment we met. Not because I was after money. Not because I wasn't good enough for your family. But because you knew exactly who I was. And you were terrified I'd figure out what you did to my uncle. My husband was staring at his father in horror. What is she talking about? My uncle was Thomas's business partner 20 years ago, I explained. They ran a development company together. When several projects failed and the company started hemorrhaging money, Thomas blamed my uncle, publicly accused him of embezzlement. Forced him out without any of his share of the remaining assets. Your uncle was stealing, Thomas said desperately. I had proof. You had fabricated documents, I corrected. Documents created specifically to frame him. To make it look like he'd been siphoning money when really, you'd been using company funds to cover losses from your personal investments. The same pattern of behavior that destroyed the family trust. Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice remained strong. My uncle spent 5 years fighting to clear his name. 5 years while his reputation was destroyed. His marriage fell apart. His business connections vanished. He died of a heart attack at 53, broken and alone, still trying to prove his innocence. The room was completely silent except for my voice. And you knew, I said to Thomas. You knew who I was the moment my husband introduced me. That's why you started spreading rumors immediately. That's why you tried to turn the family against me. You were terrified I'd come looking for revenge. But I didn't come for revenge, I continued. I came for love. I married your son because I loved him. I tried to be part of this family despite how you treated me. I found those documents by accident while organizing files you asked me to sort. I looked at my husband, who was staring at his father with tears in his eyes. But you couldn't let it go. You couldn't just accept me and move on. You had to destroy me the same way you destroyed my uncle. Except this time, I turned back to Thomas. This time, I have proof. Thomas lunged for the envelope on the table, but my husband's uncle was faster. He snatched it away, holding it out of reach. You knew about this, my husband said to his father. You knew who Lila was and you never told me? I was protecting you, Thomas said desperately. Her family has been after our money for years. She was planted. I wasn't planted, I said tiredly. I met your son at a coffee shop. We started talking about books. We fell in love. I didn't even know his last name until our third date. That's convenient, Thomas sneered. It's the truth, my husband said quietly. I remember. I deliberately didn't tell her my full name because I wanted her to like me for me, not for the family name. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Did you know? When we met, did you know who I was? No, I said honestly. Not until you told me. And even then, I didn't connect you to the Morrison who destroyed my uncle until I met your father. Until I saw his face and recognized him from the photos my uncle kept. Why didn't you tell me? My husband asked. Because I loved you, I said simply. And I didn't want your father's sins to destroy what we had. I thought I could handle the mistreatment. I thought eventually he'd see I wasn't a threat. But he already knew you weren't a threat, my husband's uncle said, studying the documents. He knew you'd found these papers. That's why he escalated tonight. This wasn't just his usual cruelty. This was panic. I didn't know she'd found anything, Thomas protested. Yes, you did, I said. I put the envelope back slightly differently than I found it. A deliberate test. And 3 days later, you started calling my husband, suggesting we needed couples time away from family, trying to get him to convince me to skip tonight's gathering. My husband stared at his father. You did call. Multiple times. I thought you were being supportive. He was terrified I'd bring these documents tonight, I said. That's why he decided to humiliate me publicly. He hoped I'd leave early, too upset to speak up. But I'm done being silenced. I looked around at the shocked faces. The documents I've shown you are copies. The originals are with my attorney, along with a full report detailing everything I found. You gave them to a lawyer? Thomas whispered. 3 days ago, I confirmed. The same day I noticed the envelope had been moved. How much? Thomas asked desperately. How much do you want to keep quiet? The room erupted in shock. My husband's uncle actually gasped. Did you just try to bribe her? Emily demanded. In front of everyone? I'm trying to resolve this reasonably, Thomas said. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding. Lila found some documents she doesn't understand. We can have our attorneys review everything and settle this quietly. Like you settled things with my uncle? I asked. With fabricated evidence and lies? Your uncle was a thief, Thomas insisted. Prove it, I challenged. Show me the evidence you used to destroy him. The documents proving he stole from your company. Thomas said nothing. You can't, I said. Because they don't exist. Just like your accusations against me don't exist. You're a liar, Thomas. You've built your entire life on lies. Your wealth, your reputation, your family's respect, all of it is based on deception and fraud. That's enough. Thomas roared. Get out of my house. No, my husband said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. She's not leaving, my husband said, his voice growing stronger. Not until we hear everything. Not until we understand exactly what you've done. I'm your father. And she's my wife, my husband interrupted. The woman I love. The woman you've been destroying for 3 years while I stood by and let it happen because I was too blind to see the truth. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Lila. I should have protected you. I should have seen what he was doing. You were protecting your inheritance, I said quietly. My husband froze. What? You knew, I said, pulling out one final document. You've known for months that your father wrote me out of the family trust, that he was pressuring you to distance yourself from me, to consider divorce. My husband's face went pale. How do you know that? Because I've been CC'd on family trust emails for 6 months. Someone, I'm guessing your Aunt Emily, has been forwarding them to me. I've seen every discussion about removing me from inheritance considerations. I've seen the pressure your father put on you. Emily nodded slowly. I've been watching Thomas manipulate this family for decades. When I saw what he was doing to you, I thought you deserved to know the truth. And you knew, I said to my husband. You knew they were cutting me out. And instead of defending me, you agreed to it. My husband couldn't meet my eyes. I thought it was temporary. Dad said, once you proved yourself. Proved myself? I asked. How was I supposed to prove myself when your father sabotaged me at every turn? I thought if I played along, eventually he'd accept you. If I just gave him time. You chose his approval over my dignity, I said. My husband's face crumbled.
I'm sorry.
God, Lila, I'm so sorry. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wedding ring, the symbol of promises that had been broken. I placed it gently on the table. I know, I said quietly. The room went completely silent. Even Thomas seemed shocked by the finality of the gesture. Lila, my husband started. I never cared about the money. I interrupted, my voice calm despite the tears streaming down my face. I never cared about the inheritance or the trust or any of it. I just wanted to be part of a family, to be treated with basic respect and dignity. I looked around at the shocked faces. But I can't be part of a family built on lies. I can't stay in a marriage where my husband chooses his father's approval over my well-being. I can't keep fighting to be seen by people who've already decided I'm invisible. This is exactly what I warned you about, Thomas said to his son. She's manipulative. She planned this entire scene. Actually, Emily interrupted, standing up. This is exactly what you've done to others for years. Thomas turned to his sister in shock. You thought we didn't know? Emily asked. You thought your financial manipulations were secret? Father knew, Thomas. Before he died, he knew what you'd been doing with the trust. That's not true, Thomas said, but his voice shook. Father changed his will in the weeks before his death, Emily continued. He wanted to remove you as primary trustee. He was gathering evidence of your mismanagement, but he died before he could finalize the changes. She looked around at the family members. And I've kept quiet for 15 years because you're my brother. Because I wanted to believe you'd made mistakes but weren't malicious. But after watching what you've done to Lila, I realized I was wrong. One by one, other family members began speaking up. You pushed my daughter out of the family business when she questioned your accounting, one cousin said. You blocked my son's scholarship fund distribution for 2 years, another added. You told my husband I was having an affair to break up my marriage when I threatened to audit the trust, Emily's daughter said. The stories poured out. Years of manipulation, lies, and financial abuse. Thomas had controlled the family through fear, money, and reputation destruction. And everyone had been too afraid or too invested to speak up. Until now. My husband sat in stunned silence, listening to his father's crimes laid out by the people who'd experienced them. Watching his image of Thomas shatter. I think, Emily said quietly, we need to have a formal family meeting, with attorneys present, to review everything Lila has found and determine next steps. I won't be part of this witch hunt, Thomas said, standing up. Then you'll be cut out of family decisions, Emily replied. Fathers will allow us to remove a trustee with a majority vote. And right now, Thomas, I don't think you have anyone's support. Thomas looked around the room. Not one person would meet his eyes. Even his closest supporters were staring at their plates. Without a word, he stormed out of the dining room. We heard the front door slam moments later. The room exhaled collectively. My husband turned to me, his face devastated.
Please.
Don't leave. We can fix this. I can fix this.
How?
I asked. How do you fix 3 years of betrayal? I'll stand up to him. I'll cut him out of our lives. You already chose, remember? You chose the inheritance over me. You admitted it. I was wrong, he said desperately. I was weak and wrong, and I'm sorry. Being sorry isn't enough, I said quietly. You knew he was writing me out of the trust. You knew he was pressuring you to leave me. And instead of telling me, you went along with it. You were protecting your financial future. I was protecting our future, he insisted. I thought if I just weathered this, eventually. Eventually what? Your father would accept me? After he destroyed my uncle? After he recognized my name and decided I was a threat? I shook my head. You can't protect someone by destroying them. And that's what you've been doing for months. Every time you stayed silent while he insulted me. Every time you took his side. Every time you asked me to just try harder with him. You were destroying me. So you're leaving? He asked, his voice breaking. I already secured my own financial independence, I said. I've been consulting on the side for 6 months. Freelance financial analysis for small businesses. I have enough saved to support myself while I figure out what's next. You've been planning this? He asked, hurt and betrayed. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. Because I realized months ago that I couldn't rely on you to protect me. Lila. I filed for separation yesterday, I said. My attorney will send you the paperwork tomorrow. The room gasped. My husband looked like I'd struck him. You can't, he whispered. I already did. Thomas chose that moment to return. He stormed back into the dining room, his face red with fury. I just spoke with my attorney, he announced. If you expose any of those documents publicly, Lila, I'll sue you for theft and defamation. I'll claim you forged everything. I'll destroy you the same way you're trying to destroy me. The threat hung in the air. Around the table, several relatives looked worried. This was the Thomas they knew, the one who crushed anyone who challenged him. But I'd anticipated this. That's interesting, I said calmly. Did your attorney mention the statute of limitations on financial fraud? Or the penalties for mismanaging trust funds? Thomas's face darkened. You have no proof those documents are legitimate. I'll claim you doctored them. I thought you might say that, I replied. Which is why I had them independently verified by a forensic accountant before I gave them to my attorney. Every document has been authenticated. Every signature has been matched to samples. Every transfer has been cross-referenced with bank records that I subpoenaed through legal channels. You can't subpoena. Actually, once I filed a complaint with the state's financial fraud division, they could. And they did. 3 days ago. The room went completely silent. You reported him? Emily asked, her eyes wide. I gave them the documents and explained what I found. They determined there was enough evidence to warrant investigation. The subpoenas were their decision, not mine. I looked at Thomas. So go ahead. Claim I forged everything. Except you'll have to explain to prosecutors why the bank records they obtained independently matched the documents I found. Why forensic analysis confirms the signatures are yours. Why dates and amounts align perfectly with public property records. Thomas stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly. You see, I continued, I never wanted revenge. I wanted protection. I knew you'd try to destroy me the moment these documents came to light. So, I protected myself legally before I ever confronted you. But there's more, Emily said quietly. Isn't there, Thomas? Thomas turned to his sister, fear flashing across his face. I've been doing my own investigation, Emily explained to the room. Once I started forwarding those emails to Lila, I became curious about other things. Other financial irregularities in Father's estate. She pulled out her phone and began reading from it. The Henderson Street property that Lila mentioned? The one that lost $2.6 million? It wasn't the only suspicious transaction. Emily, don't, Thomas warned. In 2012, a property in Riverside went into foreclosure. The trust had invested $1.8 million. We lost everything. That was market conditions, Thomas protested. In 2015, a commercial development in Hampton failed during construction. Another $2 million lost. These were legitimate business ventures. That all failed spectacularly, Emily interrupted. But here's what's interesting. In each case, the properties were purchased through shell companies. The same pattern. And in each case, funds were diverted before the properties were officially declared lost. She looked up from her phone. Where did that money go, Thomas? I don't have to answer to you, Thomas said. Actually, as a co-trustee you do, Emily's husband said. He was an attorney, I suddenly remembered. And if you can't account for trust funds, you can be held personally liable. The money went into the business ventures, Thomas insisted. All of it was legitimate. Then where are the properties now? Emily asked. If they failed, if they went into foreclosure, who owns them? Thomas said nothing. Because I did some checking, Emily continued. And it's funny. Those properties aren't in foreclosure. They're not abandoned. They're currently owned by a company called Morrison Holdings. Want to guess who owns Morrison Holdings? This is a private matter, Thomas said. Thomas owns it, Emily said to the room. He's the sole owner. Which means the money didn't disappear. It was transferred to his personal holdings through deliberate fraud. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. My husband stood up, staring at his father in horror. You stole from us? He asked. You stole from your own children? It was an investment strategy, Thomas said desperately. The properties needed to be held under different corporate structures for liability reasons. The properties the family trust supposedly lost money on are owned by your personal company. Emily's son demanded. How is that not theft? I was protecting family assets, Thomas insisted. If those properties had been held under the trust name, they would have been vulnerable to lawsuits and creditors. By transferring them, you committed fraud, Emily said flatly. You reported massive losses to the trust while actually securing the assets for yourself.
She looked at me.
That's what you found, isn't it? That's the bigger secret. It's why he destroyed my uncle, I said quietly. My uncle discovered the pattern. He realized Thomas was using their business the same way, reporting losses while secretly transferring assets to personal holdings. When my uncle threatened to expose him, Thomas fabricated evidence of embezzlement and destroyed his reputation. Your uncle, Thomas said bitterly. Your precious uncle, who is going to ruin everything. Everything you'd stolen, you mean? I corrected. I built this family's wealth. Thomas roared. When my father died, we were comfortable but not wealthy. I took risks. I made investments. I grew our assets from 8 million to 20 million. That money wouldn't exist without me. But it wasn't your money to risk, Emily said. It was trust money, meant for all of us. For our children. And instead of managing it properly, you gambled with it. And when you lost, you stole to cover the losses. I didn't steal. I restructured. You committed fraud, Emily said firmly. And you destroyed anyone who got close to discovering it, including Lila's uncle, including Lila herself. The room was silent. Everyone was staring at Thomas, seeing him clearly for the first time. Lila's uncle, Emily continued, was your business partner 20 years ago. What happened to him? He was embezzling, Thomas said automatically. No, I said quietly. He discovered what you were doing. The property transfers. The false accounting. He was going to report you. So you struck first. You created false evidence, accused him of the exact crimes you were committing, and destroyed his reputation before he could destroy yours. Your uncle, I continued, my voice thick with emotion, was a good man. An honest man. He and my aunt had been married for 20 years. They were planning to retire early and travel. He was supposed to walk me down the aisle at my wedding someday. Tears streamed down my face, but I kept talking. After you destroyed him, he couldn't find work. No one would hire him. His name was toxic in the business community. My aunt divorced him because she believed your lies. His children stopped speaking to him. He spent 5 years trying to clear his name. 5 years gathering evidence, talking to lawyers, filing appeals. He exhausted his savings. He lost his house. He lived in a studio apartment and worked odd jobs just to survive. And then he had a heart attack. Alone in that apartment. Because everyone who loved him had believed your lies and abandoned him. My voice broke. He was 53 years old. He died alone, believing he'd failed his family. Believing everyone thought he was a thief. The room was completely silent except for the sound of my crying. I was 16 when he died. I continued. I'd always been close to him. He used to take me to baseball games and teach me about investing. He encouraged me to study finance in college. He said I had a good mind for numbers. When he died, I promised myself I'd clear his name someday. I'd prove he wasn't a thief. But I had no evidence. No way to fight back. Until I married your son and accidentally found the papers you'd hidden. I looked at Thomas, who was staring at the table. You didn't just steal money, I said. You stole his life, his reputation, his family, his future. You destroyed him to protect yourself. And when I walked into this family, you recognized my name and decided to destroy me too. I didn't know, my husband whispered. I didn't know about your uncle. Would it have mattered? I asked. Would you have stood up to your father if you'd known? He had no answer. You targeted me from the beginning, I said to Thomas. Not because I was after money. Not because I wasn't good enough. But because you recognized my last name. You knew who I was before anyone else did. Thomas finally looked up. His face was hollow, defeated. When my son brought you home and introduced you as Lila Anderson, I knew exactly who you were, he admitted quietly. Your uncle's last name was Anderson. You looked like your aunt. Same eyes. Same smile. Why didn't you tell me? My husband demanded. Because I was terrified, Thomas said. I thought she'd come for revenge. I thought she knew about her uncle and was infiltrating the family to expose me. But I didn't know, I said. I had no idea you were the Morrison who destroyed my uncle until I met you. Until I saw your face and recognized it from my uncle's old photos. Even then, I convinced myself it was coincidence, that it couldn't be the same person. But it was, Thomas said. And I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I saw how you looked at me that first dinner. The way you stared when I talked about my business success. I knew you recognized me. So, you started the rumors immediately, I said. You began destroying my reputation before I could destroy yours. I was protecting my family, Thomas said weakly. You were protecting yourself, Emily corrected, at the expense of an innocent woman. Just like you did with her uncle. She looked at the rest of the family. Thomas has manipulated and controlled us for decades through fear and money. He's stolen from the trust meant for our children. He's destroyed anyone who threatened to expose him. And we've all been complicit by staying silent. Not anymore, Emily's husband said. Thomas, effective immediately, you're removed as trustee. We'll be initiating a full forensic audit of all trust assets and accounts. You'll be required to provide documentation for every transaction. And if criminal charges are warranted, we'll support prosecution. You can't do this, Thomas said. Actually, we can, Emily replied. Fathers will allow for removal of a trustee with a 2/3 vote. Every adult family member here can vote. How many want Thomas removed? Hands went up around the table. Everyone, even my husband, after a long moment, raised his hand. You're fired, Emily said. Pack your office next week. An independent trustee will be appointed to manage the assets until we determine next steps. Thomas looked around at the sea of raised hands. His power, his control, his carefully constructed empire, all of it crumbling in front of him. I could still destroy you, Thomas said to me. I could tell everyone you manipulated your way into this family, that you orchestrated this entire. You could try, I interrupted. But who would believe you? You've been exposed as a fraud. Your family has turned against you. And every statement I've made tonight is backed by documented evidence. I stood up, gathering my papers. But I'm not going to pursue charges against you. The room erupted in surprise. Even Thomas looked shocked. I'm not interested in revenge, I continued. I never was. I just wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted my uncle's name cleared. I wanted people to know he wasn't a thief. I looked around at the family. The documents I've provided prove my uncle was innocent. They show Thomas's pattern of fraud. That's enough for me. So you're just letting him go? Emily asked, confused. No, I said. I'm giving you all a choice. You can pursue legal action if you want. You have all the evidence. You have the power to seek justice. But I won't be the one driving that process. I turned to Thomas. However, I do have one condition. You will publicly clear my uncle's name. You will write a letter to every business associate, every former colleague, everyone who believed your lies about him. You will admit he was innocent. You will acknowledge you fabricated evidence against him. I won't, Thomas said. Then I will personally deliver these documents to the prosecutor's office and testify at your trial, I replied. I'll do interviews. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. Your reputation, your legacy, everything you've built. I'll tear it all down. Thomas stared at me. He knew I meant it. If you clear my uncle's name, I continued, I'll stay silent about the rest. I won't pursue charges. I won't talk to the media. I'll let your family decide what to do with you. But my uncle's reputation must be restored. That's your price? Thomas asked. That's my price. The room was silent, everyone waiting. Thomas looked at the faces around the table, his children, his siblings, his grandchildren. He saw the disappointment and anger in their eyes. Fine, he said finally. I'll write the letters. No, I said. You'll do better than that. You'll make a public statement at the Chamber of Commerce meeting next month, where all your colleagues will hear it. You'll admit what you did. You'll tell the truth. That's humiliating, Thomas protested. Yes, I said. It is. But it's justice. And it's far less than you deserve. The next month passed in a blur. True to his word, Thomas appeared at the Chamber of Commerce meeting and made his statement. I wasn't there, Emily filmed it for me, but I heard it was devastating. Thomas admitted to fabricating evidence against my uncle. He acknowledged stealing from the family trust. He publicly apologized and asked for forgiveness he didn't deserve. His reputation was destroyed. Business associates distanced themselves. Longtime friends stopped returning calls. The man who'd built an empire on lies watched it crumble because the truth finally came out. My husband tried repeatedly to reconcile. He sent flowers, wrote letters, showed up at my apartment begging for another chance. But I'd meant what I said that night. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after that dinner. I kept my maiden name, Anderson, the name my uncle had given me, the name that had triggered Thomas's recognition and fear. Emily became the primary trustee. She hired forensic accountants who discovered even more irregularities. Thomas was eventually ordered to return nearly $4 million to the trust. He had to sell his house and most of his assets to comply. The family began healing. Without Thomas's manipulation, they started having honest conversations. They supported each other. They even reached out to me occasionally, apologizing for how they'd treated me. As for me, I took my financial analysis consulting full-time. Built a reputation for helping small businesses identify fraud and mismanagement. My first major client was a woman whose business partner had been stealing from her. I helped her recover her money and rebuild. My uncle's name was cleared. The business community learned the truth. His ex-wife even reached out to apologize, though it was 30 years too late. And Thomas? Last I heard, he was living in a small apartment, estranged from most of his family, working as a consultant for a firm that didn't know his history. The mighty had fallen. And I'd done it by simply telling the truth. 6 months after that dinner, I received an unexpected call from Emily. I wanted you to know something, she said. The forensic audit uncovered more than we expected. Thomas had been stealing from the trust for nearly 20 years. The total amount is over $8 million. That's more than the trust was originally worth, I said, shocked. Exactly. Which means all the growth over the years, all the money that should have gone to our children's education, our retirements, our futures, Thomas stole it. Every penny. What will you do? Prosecute, Emily said firmly. He refused to make full restitution. He's still lying about the extent of his fraud. So we're moving forward with criminal charges. I thought you should know in case you wanted to testify about your uncle. I'll be there, I said. The trial happened 8 months later. I testified about my uncle, about the pattern of fraud, about the night at dinner when everything came to light. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict Thomas of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of fiduciary duty. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. My ex-husband sent me a letter afterward. He apologized again, said he'd finally understood what his father had done, that he'd been blind and weak and sorry. He asked if we could talk. I didn't respond. Some chapters need to close. Today, I'm sitting in my office in my own building, reviewing a case for a new client. Another person cheated by someone they trusted. Another story of financial abuse that needs investigation. My phone buzzes. A message from Emily. Thomas was denied parole. Justice continues. I smile and get back to work. Because that night at the family gathering, when Thomas refused to speak to me, when he tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, he didn't know he was giving me exactly what I needed. The motivation to stop staying silent. The courage to reveal the truth. And the satisfaction of watching someone who destroyed so many lives finally face consequences. He refused to speak to me at the family gathering. By the end of the night, the room was silent for him. And that was the only justice my uncle needed.